Welcome to today's RUC People, and I'm delighted to be joined by Roger Falls. Welcome, Roger. Roger has been part of our church with his wife Vicky, and Daniel has been part of our church for quite a few years now.
10 years.
10 years, is it, moving down from Johannesburg? So yeah, Roger, tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now.
Well, I came down 10 years ago to retire, and I must say after about 3-4 years, I actually was frustrated, quite frankly, because I was not a hobby man. I never had a hobby. My hobby was my career, and I'll talk a bit about that, and I really loved it. But soon afterwards, I got sort of called into, through family members, into a group, Seeds group, that basically runs and develops early childhood development centers. And the running was very much at the top end, and I think all the trustees were old enough to say, look, we need somebody, not that I'm young, but somebody else to get in there. And that's quite a big ECD. It's about 300 kids. It's up in Imazamo Yetu. It's been running for 20 years, and it's rated as one of the top ECDs, and it's really a pleasure to work there with the teachers. Interesting thing, we went through COVID, 300 kids, 300 parents, 18 teachers. We didn't have one case of COVID, which I think is quite remarkable. But I think the kids are maybe more protected in that regard. And then at the other end of the scale, and really where I came in, is there's so much learning and talent in what we're doing in Cape Town that we felt there was a much bigger need in the country. So for whatever reason, it's a whole reason, but I won't go into that, we ended up in the Klein Karoo in a place called Van Wyksdorp, where there was a particular lady who just had the energy to want to do something like that. She started with 4 kids in her backyard, and we've come in there with whatever's required, not necessarily so much money, more effort and directing them to money. And we've now got land, and we've got a property, we've got 66 children. We operate from the local Lutheran church with some difficulty. It's an old, small Lutheran church with only 2 toilets, with 60 kids. That's a challenge. But we're now at a stage where we look like we're going to get, we've already got major sponsorship towards that to get them through the Department of Social Development and Department of Education program. But now we look set and keep fingers crossed, but in the next couple of months to get something like 3 million rand to build a Pucker ECD in Van Wyksdorp. But the interesting thing is, in the process of all of that, it's a 900 people village. With all the drugs and on the road and no jobs, we've got a situation there now, you won't believe it, that the town is clean. The kids have all got some jobs, some clean the streets, some grow carrots, some do spekbomen, which is quite popular in that area. And it's such a rewarding thing to work with little kids. So nice change in my career.
And what's your particular role in that project?
I basically run it. We are trustees, but they needed somebody to run it. So my title is General Manager. And I tell you what, I work harder now than I've ever worked before, because I haven't got a secretary, I haven't got a financial guy. So
it's a full-time role?
It's full-time, yeah.
Right,
full-time.
Okay, and based...
I do it from home, off at Little Lambs.
Right.
But Little Lambs is largely running. I do my Seeds work, but based at Little Lambs to keep in touch.
Well, I assume that's quite a change of career from what you were doing for most of your professional life.
A lovely change. There's nothing nicer. And I always say, well, why am I doing this? It's for the children. The children give you your rewards, much more than employees ever or jobs ever give you. It's amazing.
Wonderful. So, Roger, take us back right to the start. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? Tell us a bit about your family and your schooling.
I grew up in the war. I was born in 1941 in Germany. We were quite protected. We were in a little cloister of only about 80 people. So we were, fortunately, through relationships the way they work, very protective as a young family, me and my sister. She was born 2 years later than me. And my father was on the Russian front fighting the Russians at Moscow, and was one of those stories where some survived and came back. He came back in 46, I think it was, as an absolute, he was a skeleton. I got pictures, you can't believe it, how terrible. He had been in detention there for a year. But he came back, and my mom, who in early life had been an au pair for a German family in Southwest, in Namibia now, said, we're out of here. She was that sort of lady, very determined. We're out of here and we're going to Southwest Africa, which we did. South African government had a package that invited professionals from Europe 48, when the Nats got to power, to come to South Africa. So we had 10 cubic meters of luggage. We were on a Drakensberg castle, which took 3 weeks, and we arrived in Namibia. My schooling went basically Srokomund. I went to boarding school, and all still very German. I mean, I wore lederhosen, and the things that Germans wear, much to the joy of, the joke of my friends, but my mom's joy.
I went to Swakopmund. I think it's the weirdest place I've ever been to. You're not sure if you're in Germany or in the desert or at the beach, or in South Africa in a township. So it's very German. No,
They speak 3 languages there. They speak German, they speak Southwester, and they speak whatever the other language is called, which is a mix of everything. Wonderful. It's still a wonderful country. Anyway, so that was sort of a very German upbringing. I went to the German school there, and I did my joint matriculation board. And from there, I went to Cape Town Varsity, and I did chemical engineering, which was a great degree, I must say. I met a lot of good friends who are still friends now. But I actually never went into chemical engineering. Chemical engineering is about refineries, oil refineries, and chemical stuff. I was recruited by Anglo-American and went into the minerals industry. It's quite related, but it was minerals rather than chemicals. And I must say from there, when I thought about talking today, I've had, God sent me on a career that you can't believe. I have loved every step of my career. And I always had a boss up front who said, if you don't wake up in the morning and feel excited about going to work, change your job. I never got there. I was just lucky to get jobs that I really enjoyed. So I went to Anglo, initially on a research thing, and that got me to Italy for a while with Vicky, which was quite nice. She was my girlfriend at the time for about 9 months. Also a long story, but I won't go into that. That process is still running. It's a registered new way of treating copper. And then coming back from there, I went to Oranienburg, back to Southwest. Oranienburg is a diamond town at the bottom end of Southwest. And I was fortunate that I got there when they built a whole bunch of new diamond plants. And I was the process engineer in charge. So I really had a diversity of that knowledge. And because there was nothing else to do, I really got to know diamonds and how to get diamonds and what to do. And through that, a contractor, a British company, Mitchell Cotts, they kind of knocked on my door and wooed me into a contracting business, construction contracting, project management business. My dad thought I was crazy. In those days, you went to corporates. I was probably one of the big corporates with Anglo.
You start at the bottom and work your way up.
And I'm going to a contractor. Anyway, best move I made. I took that diamond knowledge and some similar related technology that fitted in with that, and we bought a little company at the time, and that got me to Australia. So I went to Australia for 3 years, to Perth. I was in Perth, loved my 3 years in Perth. We really, because we had nothing, and we got to Perth, and suddenly people liked us because we knew diamond technology. And we ended up actually long term, we built the biggest diamond plant in the world, Argyle, the Argyle diamond plant was our project, our technology, and we did the project management. And then I stayed, I ran the office there for 3 years. And then a friend of mine from way back, a Joburg friend, said, look, come and join Bateman. Now, Bateman in South Africa was, at that time, not anymore, but the biggest mineral processing organization in South Africa, and beginning to become that globally in certain technologies, which is mainly diamonds, of course, because we knew a lot about diamonds, coal washing, which is quite common in many parts of the world, including Australia in those days, gold, which was a strength of ours, and iron ore. Now, iron ore in South Africa is kind of dirty iron ore. Iron ore, as required in Japanese, is highly technically cleaned iron ore, 60% iron ore. And the technology we had lent itself to that. So I ended up being involved with the biggest iron ore beneficiation plant in South Africa, Sishen, which was then really a major step forward for them. And the 2 biggest plants in Western Australia, Mount Newman and Hamersley. RTZ and BHP. So, and then gold plants we did, but that wasn't really my strength. Well, I then got the job to run Australia for Bateman, who'd be. We set up a big office there. And that really was the start of my real career, I might say. I got into general management, and I ended up running for Bateman. Bateman was a 2,500 people organization, quite global by then. My drive was part of the globalization, and I ran the global industry. So I didn't run the South African part, but I ran the rest, which was a lot of travel, which I loved. And Vicky and I did a lot of traveling. I've been to every part of the world where there are diamonds, and I've built something in every part of the world where there are diamonds. And there are a lot of coal, but that was quite common, like others as well. And on the iron ore, we had a speciality also for about 8-10 years before others did that as well. So it was very much at the forefront, and very much was something I'd grown up with practically. Now, it wasn't just something I'd learned and we did. I'd dirtied my hands on it. So. And the traveling around, I mean, I've been to China, I opened the first office in China, I went to Russia, because I'm German, I could go there, South Africans couldn't. And my son, who's with Colgate, lived in places like Mexico and then Guatemala. So we've had a beautiful joy, Ricky, of travel long enough to make friends. So we have a spread of friends globally and do things together to this day. So really a very exciting career. And ready to retire, really, in a way. But then our main competitor in Australia said, look, we'd like you to spend some time with us. So I went back into the business after about 5 years of retirement and set up their South African operations, which is mainly into Africa. So Angola and DRC and Sierra Leone. And good time, very good time, because Africa at that time was really growing. But it's all minerals mining. That's the game I was in. And then, as I say, I came down to Cape Town and really sat around for 3 years. Had a bit of a mental knock, a bit of a close stroke, I suppose, and went through a bit of a tough time for a year because I just couldn't do nothing, and I had no hobby. My advice to anybody is get a hobby. It really ate me. Anyway, so I got into the ECD world. Family-wise, again, we were just so blessed. So my first son, Mish, he was born about, I don't know, a month before we were sent to Oraniemund. And Oraniemund is one of those entities where everything's paid for. Your carpets, your house, just about your food. You had 2 Obambas working in the house. So anything I earned, which wasn't much. My first salary was 220 Rand a month. Can you believe it? Anyway, we could save that all. From there, came back to Joburg, and shortly after coming back to Joburg, we had that Perth stint. So also as an expat, so we really found our feet because we were quite poor. We had really nothing. Interesting, Mickey and I got married in Beyers Nadir's church in Aspelkop in Johannesburg, which is quite a known, Beyers Nadir is quite a known entity in the Protestant religions. But we hopped around quite a bit. My dad was Catholic. My mom was German Lutheran. And mom sort of brought up the kids. We then went to a Presbyterian church, no, Methodist church first. When I went to UCT, I went to Methodist right next to College House, which is my residence. We then went to Aussie, we went to an Anglican church for a while. And then we came back Joburg, and Joburg was a serious stint. David Jones ran St. James. He's a well-known, well, he's passed away now, minister there, and we ended up being on the church council. Both Vic and I were elders. I was session clerk, so I was very heavily involved in a congregation of about 400, 500 people. And then we came to Cape Town, and we initially...
So what brought you to Cape Town, Roger?
What took me?
What brought you
I
here?
was always going to go back to Cape Town. I'd spent 5 years studying here, so for me there was no question.
So you studied here, but then your work took you everywhere else, and you actually never lived in Cape Town other than as a student.
Other than a student. But ask Vicky, it was always sort of on the calendar. We did our holidays here.
Right.
And the reason why Vicky didn't go was, the Joburg girls don't like the rain, don't like the wind. That was her main objection. They really didn't like the weather down here. Anyway, cut a long story short, my daughter eventually, Tanya, who was, Vicky and Tanya have got a very special sort of mother-daughter relationship. and their son is as old as my grandson. So they were buddies at school. So we moved to Cape Town. And in Rondebosch here, they stayed. We've moved to Constantia. I moved around probably to my old Methodist church, which was a bit old, I might say. I went to Common Ground, and they didn't even have a cross in the church. They had a hall with not even a cross. And I can tell a couple of stories. Very good services. I thought they were good, but a bit of I didn't feel at home there. And then we came here one Sunday. In fact, I came here and took to Robert, because he's also German, quite quickly, and we've loved it. I mean, we settled in here, and I often say to Robert, he runs a church of interesting people, and that's why you're interviewing them, and the more I hear, the more I learn how interesting our people are. But what he's done, which I'd never experienced in my Christian faith, and we always were involved somewhere at quite a level. We didn't just go to church on Sundays. That he didn't only involve people, but he actually made people get involved in the church, like you're doing. And that's quite a unique. Not many churches do that. Many try, but it's always the same four guys, always the elders, always, and maybe the ministers are told to rely on them only. Here, everyone was involved in something. So I really liked RUC and enjoyed it. Kids, we got 4 kids. Mishius, interesting careers. Mishius, he imports, exports wildlife, does very well. So he establishes a zoo in Canada, maybe, and he brings a jumbo load of animals from somewhere in South Africa. Motswari was one, and they fly them straight in there. It's huge business and very interesting business. And I must say, wildlife was my life as well. My hobby, but also my sort of my balance maybe in my life was to go in the bush. And with Daniel, you've met Daniel, with Daniel's dad, we actually set up which we sold in the end, a safari business up in Botswana, on the border between South Africa and Botswana in the All Days region. And it was fantastic. It was a luxury tented camp, 10 guests, and oh man, I was the sort of the backer, and he was the guy who did it. Found it wonderful. But unfortunately, he and his wife got killed in a motor car accident, and there was Daniel, 18 months old, who we then, with lots of difficulty, I might add, adopted. Not difficulty with the department stuff, that was very good actually, the South African Supreme Court I was very impressed with, but difficulty with the other half of the family, and I don't want to go into that, but Daniel's adopted. He's now 18 years from 18 months, and is at Rondebosch School, does very well, writes his matric this year. For my nerves, he drives the motor car, white-knuckled grandfather or father, as he calls us. And then I mentioned I've got a daughter, Tanya. She's down here, just down the road actually, in Park Road. Her husband's with Duracell, and she's top sports lady, and is very active in sort of part-time things, but she always seems to be active and does good things. And then my second son is Francois, and he quite early in his career joined Colgate in Joburg. Went to one of these seminars they had in head office in New York, sat next to the chairman, and the chairman kind of liked him. And he talked about his travels. Francois has always been a traveling guy. And he said, look, we need a guy to go to Mexico. And none of my American colleagues, they don't travel well, wants to go to Mexico. And South African, Francois put up his hands and I'd like to go. And it was just one of those times. He went, they just come out of a bit of a lull. That country had a really very great success rate. He was there about 3.5 years. And then from there, they said, look, we got another place that I think you can fix. So he went to Guatemala. Many people don't even know where it is. A wonderful country. So he had 3.5 years there. And we, of course, spent time in both, quite a lot of time. And then he always yearned to come back to South Africa. That was always his yearning. And he became managing director of Colgate South Africa. And now he doesn't want to leave. He's on a 3 to 5 year, you're going to move somewhere else. He's an expat in their organization. But he's now sort of fallen in love with South Africa. But so I don't know what his decision comes up next year. I don't know what he'll do. But that's for us is a blessing. That we got all the kids back here and see them a lot. We're a close family. We got 8 grandkids, So, that's already a big span. And when we go away on a family thing, it's 20 kids, 20 people. It's a close-knit family. We do a lot together. We enjoy each other. And, that's, I suppose, a bit of a wrap-up.
Okay. So, Roger, you've touched on a few things there. Your German roots, but lived most of your life here in a mixture of Namibia and South Africa, and you said you travelled a lot. Do you still identify as a German in some ways?
So. And
how does that influence your identity?
Very much so. I still have very sort of good German friends, and I'm still very Germanic in my way. Don't forget, I was grown up in the war. So, if you got a plate of food, you ate it. Kids today, they go and they get it. Well, Americans are the worst, I think. They go and get this plate full of food and then leave half behind.
Yes.
I can't do that. I really goes against my grain. And some of those sort of very maybe old-fashioned discipline things, and they cause stress with the younger family. But they all put up with me. Oh, here comes Grandpa with his German stuff, So it's not an issue, but I still have a lot of German in me. Speak it. Vicky speaks it. Vicky did a matric in German to try and get a German passport. And my kids all got German passports, and they speak a broken German, but we still have a German stronghold.
And you tell us how you and Vicky came to be together.
Yeah, Vicky. So I was at Anglo at the time, and she was Anglo head office. And I was in the research lab. We were allowed to go to lunch at head office on Fridays, which is quite a nice canteen and really nice. Anyway, and I saw this girl sort of across, and you know how you look at a girl and you think she's reacting? I thought there was a reaction. Anyway, so I worked myself around in such a way that I got her to the lift, into the lift with her, and I got chatting. Lifts are normally quiet. And we had this conversation. It must have been quite embarrassing now that I think of it, but this was my moment. Anyway, and I sort of said, I'd like to go out with you, and we went out, and really we became boyfriend, girlfriend very quickly. And then, as I say, married in Asphalt. And really we've had an amazing marriage, because Vicky was, when you travel, you got to have a supportive wife. And Vicky fitted into that role and did it and managed it, new households, just tremendously.
Like you travelling a lot, but you had 4 kids, and so she was at home.
Well, travelled with us. We managed, I think, every place that I liked that I saw, she came along. So we travelled a lot together, but the kids were then older and could look after themselves.
Right, but during the years when the kids were younger and you were building your career, Vicky must have had a heavy responsibility.
No, she coped very well. And the kids were good. We were lucky again. We had so much joy and luck in our life that came at times when the kids were like at primary school and high school and didn't really want to move. Then the kids moved with us. I went to Australia twice. We went to Sydney and the kids moved. I loved Sydney.
You lived in Sydney?
I thought the business ethic in Australia is tops. And I still believe that. They're top, clean, decent, no Zuma type stuff exists there. And a handshake is a handshake. So I loved it. But Tanya's boyfriend was a South African, and Tanya came with us. And that was, as we say here, lots of snots and jhana and lots of telexes and emails. And we left Francois here because his career was sort of at a stage he didn't want to leave. Fortunately, in our house. That was when Mandela came to power. 1976 we went there. And eventually I formed a joint venture there with an Australian company, Kinhill. Very successful joint venture. But I'd committed myself to run it as chairman. So my time was like 60% Australia and 40% South Africa for a year, until I restructured and got local management and we had enough jobs. That was tough.
Okay.
That was tough.
And Roger, you've touched on sort of the tragedy of losing a child and their partner. How was that for you? How did you and Vicky deal with that?
A couple of things that, first of all, I never knew, but I learned. People, individuals, even husband and wife, even close husband and wife, grieve differently. And I think mothers particularly grieve more because they give birth to a child. So Vicky went through a very, very, very serious time of grieving. And still today, Vicky, because Christian, the boy, my son.
How old was he when he died?
24. 24, 25.
And they'd just
And in
given
the
birth to
prime-
Daniel.
yeah,
How old was Daniel?
Daniel
when?
was 18 months when it happened.
Yeah.
And they were on this fantastic venture, which was sort of my baby also in a way, and it all fell to pieces. And I was on De Beers property, and I had to move out from there within a year. No, it was a very, very tough time. The other tough time was their family was or the wife's family was a bit of a, not that stable a family, whereas in comparison we were very stable, sort of in the history. And they're quite good. They bring people in to judge all of that. Anyway, she was quite keen to keep Daniel, and mothers do have a first, grandmothers have, or the maternal side has a first right, you might call it. But Vicky had made a promise to Daniel and to Ronald, to his wife, that if ever anything happened, we would take over. But it was never recorded. Anyway, cut a long story short, that was a worrying time for about a year. And Daniel was, he just, you know, it was early enough that Daniel actually doesn't remember his parents, and quite frankly stays away from that painful part of his life. And we became really mom and dad quite quickly. Later, it got more difficult because here were these old, retired mom and dad, and he was a youngster at primary school. But he coped, he battled full of times. I didn't battle that, well, I did battle twice. I was, as you sense, very absorbed in my job, and it was an international job, so I still traveled, maybe more than I should have with hindsight. And I then, when I thought I'd overcome, I never grieved that badly or that deeply. When I thought I'd overcome that, I took on this new job to run an Australian company. And I went with a guy who was also a religious guy, and we went up in Denver, we went skiing. And I'd been skiing with Christian, Daniel's father. I got there and I had a complete collapse. Complete collapse. They had to send me back. And that was sort of delayed grief, which comes. And then here in Cape Town, when I went through the sort of stressful period, I don't quite know what it brought on, but there I had a second bout of really extreme stress, grief. So my grief was, well, I went to see somebody to help me, but he said, your grief at the time, the first grief, was contained because you had to look after Vicky and Daniel, but in a controlled, manly way, you might say, which apparently happens.
But you didn't really give expression to that grief at the time, and then it manifested itself.
I didn't leave it out, and it came much later.
Yeah.
And apparently it's not abnormal, but it was tough for me.
Yeah. Well, and as someone who's been very much a career man and focused on your work for many years, I know many struggle with retirement. Then you take that away, and so much of your identity has been wrapped up in your work and your career, and then suddenly, who am I when I don't have that? You said you found that tough being here in Cape Town.
Well, we started off maybe in a typical way as people would. So we did a Botswana trip, we did a South American trip for about 2 months. We had one, I would move to Argentina tomorrow. Such a fantastic country. And we did lots locally here with our friends. And even Cape Town initially was so exciting. We bought a house and we did this. But then came like the routine. Now, what do you do today? And, I played bridge, but, you also can only play so much bridge a day. And then this opportunity came along out of the blue, I just took it like that, and I loved it from day one.
And you still have energy? Are you in good health?
I had also two things. I'm quite a hiker, so I go mountain hiking in those days quite a lot. And I suddenly developed a back problem, and I had a major back operation. And most people will tell you, at your age, I was then, 78, dicey. And I went to an amazing guy. He was just a young doctor that told me go to him, and he's just magic. He took me through it all. He operated me, and 8 weeks later, I was back walking normally, and 3 months later, I was hiking. I'm back hiking like I've had nothing.
Yeah.
And then I had that stroke more recently, where I don't still know why, but there was something that happened, and I just struck. But it was a minor thing. It was they call it a vertigo stroke or something like that. Yeah. So it's quite nasty when you have it, but you can recover from it. I've fully recovered from it. I'm back hiking.
Yeah, looking very well. And I gather you said you were born in 1941, so you had a big milestone last year, turning 80, and still working full time. So it's wonderful. And RUC, you said you checked out different places, but something resonated for you when you came here. What was it?
Quite quick. Well, Robert, I took to Robert very quickly, just in the way he conducts his services. It's sort of, I don't want to, but it's a sort of a level up from maybe others that I'd been to, and that I liked and that challenged me. And Vicky was very much at home here. She liked it, and then got on the council, as you know. And the people, I met so many people here, and they interface me, like Heidi also does ECD stuff, so you do, and we got interfaced with that. And we made a lot of friends here, personal friends out of all of that, which is wonderful. And
would you say faith's been an important part of your life throughout, and something that has sustained you? And
I grew up, very strong, and when I came here, I sort of looked at it a little bit. My folks were both, my mother was on the council, my dad was on the council. He was Catholic, but on the Protestant council, but he was the treasurer. And they'd lived through the war, and with lots of Christianity at home. But a German Christianity, if I can explain it like it was quite quick. I mean, we said, "Komm, Herr Jesus, sei unser Gast, segne, was du uns beschert hast," which was like the prayer for lunch or for meal. We said that all our life. There was never a variation. That's what we said. And in the evenings, we said our prayer, and there were about 3-4 prayers we said. Now it's quite different. And I think maybe I call it the evangelical way of doing things today is much more open. You talk and you say a prayer and you talk with God, much more like he's a friend. God to me in those days was, wow, yes, God. It was very reverent. Very reverent. And then in Sydney, we went to an Anglican church, but it was a charismatic Anglican church. He was a very well-known Reverend Roberts, a wonderful man. And then in Mexico, I went to a Mexican Catholic church. That's when I went to this Catholic church. We were on holiday there, and my father passed away. That was quite tough, actually, at the time, because I had to then change all our business plans and personal plans. But I went to this Catholic charismatic church, and I thought, I did Latin at school, so I could cope. It was quite actually something. So I've always searched for a church very, very quickly and found a church somewhere that I could settle into. And, we're religious at home. Not overly. I mean, we've got friends who maybe joke about it even, but they know with us that's maybe not done. Okay. We've walked out of dinners when people have been a bit blasphemous and said, look, you're friends, but bye-bye, we don't do that.
Okay.
So we've got a strong faith base.
And what does fun look like for you? You've mentioned hiking, but have you developed more hobbies in retirement as you've had more time? Bridge?
What I'd say to everybody, get a hobby. I never had a hobby, and I see so many of my friends who've got hobbies who I can now really rejoice in what they're doing. I never had that. Bridge, I always played bridge, but bridge is, you can't play bridge 3 times a week. Well, I can't. Vicky plays quite a lot. It doesn't sit with me that well. I always played hockey, so I was till quite late. I played veterans, so I played nice hockey. Not first team, but sort of third team type stuff. So that took a lot of my life. My travel, because travel is not just, I always say the preparing for the trip, and I do albums, and the album afterwards, that's like a double trip. That's so much fun. I've still got piles of albums that I go through and re-enjoy my Botswana trip. And then I found this Little Lambs, which started off as a bit of a hobby, seeds. But it's become, it's bitten me. Those kids are so rewarding, and the needs are so tremendous. And it's so, I must say, it's so easy. Because through that business contact, I've got lots of people. I can write to them and say, hey guys, we really need some donations. And people want to do that. You must just touch them and tell them, look, this is what we're doing, give us some. I mean, I had a guy recently, Pal from Yonks, who came past and said, look, I want to go to Van Beekstad. I said, that's 4.5 hours away. I want to go, Roger. So he got in his car and he went there and he phoned me from there and says, I'm in. We got a trust in London. You're going to get some money from us. So it's amazing how people respond to that need in South Africa. Well, not only here, Asia also. I think there's a similar, because I deal with an Asian lady who did that sort of thing in Bangladesh. And she's now become one of our sponsors. And they're big sponsors. There's big money available.
Roger, I'm going to ask you a slightly more difficult question.
Yeah.
As a white South African living through the apartheid years, moving out of that in the extractive industry, we know that many black South Africans worked in the mines, often under very difficult conditions, and you were in a management position. Can you reflect on that experience, how that was for you, and maybe the transitions as we've moved into democracy here in South Africa?
Many elements to that question. So first of all, when we came from Germany out, little Lillywhite and Lederhosen into Walvis Bay at that time, I said to Vicky, I don't think I knew the black people, because they stayed in those days they called it a location. And they were Bombers, they were hired from a Bomberland. They stayed in a location. We had two. We had one that came in the house, we had one a gardener, and we treated them like you would treat an employee, but never like they were African, we were white. That sort of didn't exist in our home, in our thinking. So that was one that I don't really forget. Then when I came to university, that was a bit difficult for me, because university was at a time when Kennedy came to South Africa. I heard that from. In fact, that changed me. Before that, I didn't like that Adrian Leftwich and that crowd and the black sash that we have here. I was a bit anti that, but I wasn't particularly pro-coloureds or blacks. I didn't get involved there. But then Kennedy came, and when Kennedy made his speech at Jamison Hall, I changed. It was so powerful about addressing that issue. And for the rest, in the mining industry, I was more involved at the process engineering end, so I didn't have that large number in mining involvement, but I was very conscious of it. Because through my travels, there were two sides to it. When I went to Aussie, and I told you we had good friends there, I remember going to a dinner, and I said, look, Roger, we got some friends coming tonight, and they're a bit sensitive about the South Africa stuff. So when they were throwing the flower bombs and things. And he said, please do us a favor, let's not bring up South Africa. And if it comes up, just back off. That's how serious Australia was at that time. And, okay, I did that. And the other time was when I did business in Africa. I was all over Africa. Congo, Angola, up in the... I never saw black-white. Then 90% of the people that ran the place were black people who'd studied in England or who'd studied in France, many of them, in the DRC, and they were equals, and they were as good as I was, and they ate with us at the table. So that also was a major change in my mindset. And then, sort of in our Joburg days, we to this day still communicate every birthday, every occasion, and in general, just Somasua with the lady that was our house lady in Joburg, Elizabeth. She's now retired, but we still chat. And we chat like we're family. So to me today, what I'm doing today, I think is a bit of repay for what I never really, I was never sort of black-white. That didn't exist in my mind. But what I didn't do, what I could have done then, and I didn't do. That sat with me as almost a guilt thing for a while. And now I can give all that back. They're all black children. They're Zimbabweans, they're Malawians. And, oh man, those children. It's so easy to give back and so rewarding to see it.
So the future for you, I mean, do you plan to keep working indefinitely while your health remains? And,
well, I suppose, again, there are two elements to it. I love to. I work as much at the moment as I worked in my career, but joyful work. I don't mind getting up at 5 because we're going to get a proposal out to Lotto or whatever it is, and I've been a bit late in it. So that part of it I like. But, getting old and some of my friends not being there anymore, I don't feel it, but I feel it in that sense. And, having to be more frugal. I mean, we don't budget. We didn't budget, in my career. There were bonuses. And don't forget, the 60s and the 70s and the 80s were fantastic growth years in the mining industry. So, now you retired and you got to watch your pennies and you got to say, oh my gosh, that car needs replacing. How are we going to do that? So it's been an adjustment in that regard. But, you adjust. And we maybe don't travel so much anymore, but then we traveled a lot. So retirement, I'm not retired yet. I'm not, mentally I'm not retired yet. And I've got a group, we got the Terrible 10, which is a group of 5 couples, and we meet every year. And we know, in fact, 2 of them I've known longer than Vicky. And Vicky and I have been married for 50 years, 51 this year. And we get together once a year, and we're all a bit like I'm reflecting now, and they all still do things. They're all still active. I mean, some just travel a lot, but they're all, one's in photography, and we live a great life. The whole bunch of them are still active and doing things, and that helps you too, that you get a bunch of guys around you, and my young family, and Daniel. So I haven't got a chance of going old yet, but I suppose it'll come.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Roger. It's been great to get to know you a bit better and for sharing some of your experiences. And we wish you well in these future years.
Actually, just in closing, I think what you're doing is fabulous. I've mentioned it to some of my friends, and they said, one of the issues about going to church is you sit in the same place every Sunday, and I do, but we do, and you meet the same people over tea, and you sort of know a little bit. You know that the guy's just had a fall and broken a leg, but knowing people like you achieving through these interviews, I don't think many churches do that. I think it's a brilliant concept.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you for helping.
It is.